I was standing on my front porch watching the sunrise over the Montana hills when a silver Mercedes pulled up my dirt driveway, kicking up dust that settled on my coffee mug. The woman who stepped out wore heels completely inappropriate for ranch land and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Good morning," I called out, trying to be friendly despite the early hour interruption. "Can I help you?" She didn't smile back. Her blonde hair was styled in that perfectly asymmetrical bob that screamed management material, and her pantsuit probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. "Are you Yates Owens?" "That's me. I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." She said it like I should be impressed. "We need to discuss several violations on your property." I almost laughed. "Madam, I think you have the wrong address. This is the Rocking O Ranch. There's no HOA out here." Her smile was thin and sharp. "Actually, that's where you're mistaken. The Meadowbrook Estates development was approved 2 years ago, and according to our boundaries, your property falls within our jurisdiction. I have the paperwork right here." She thrust a packet at me. I took it, still confused, and flipped through pages of dense legal text. My grandfather had died 8 months ago, leaving me this 2,000-acre ranch that had been in our family since 1868. The idea that some suburban housing development thought they had authority over land my great-great-great-grandfather had homesteaded was absurd. "Look, Mrs. Henderson, I think there's been a mistake. My family has owned this land for over 150 years. The deed is registered with the county. There's no HOA. Mr. Owens, I understand you're new to property ownership, but ignorance of the rules doesn't excuse violation of them. You have multiple infractions. Your fence is the wrong color, you have commercial vehicles parked in plain sight, there are livestock visible from the road, and your grass exceeds the permitted height of 4 inches. I stared at her. "It's not grass. It's grazing land for cattle which I raise, on my ranch. Regardless, the rules are clear. You have 30 days to remedy these violations or face fines of $500 per day per violation. Additionally, we're implementing a special assessment of $15,000 for all properties to fund our new community center." My jaw clenched. "Get off my property." "Excuse me, you heard me. This is private land and you're trespassing. Whatever paperwork you think you have, it doesn't apply here." Patricia's expression hardened. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers, Mr. Owens. We don't tolerate this kind of hostility in Meadowbrook Estates." She click-clacked back to her Mercedes and peeled out, sending gravel flying. I watched her go, then looked down at the packet in my hands. This was going to be a problem. Inside, I called my neighbor, Frank Morrison, who'd ranched the adjacent property for 40 years. "Frank, have you heard anything about an HOA trying to claim authority over our land?" "Hell yes, I've heard about it," he growled. "Those developers have been trying to expand their boundaries for months. They built that planned community 5 miles south, and now they're trying to rope in surrounding properties to increase their assessment base. It's a money grab, pure and simple. Can they do that? Not legally, no. But they're counting on people not fighting back. Most folks can't afford lawyers for a prolonged court battle. They figure they'll just wear you down. Well, they picked the wrong ranch." I spent the rest of the morning digging through my grandfather's papers. He'd been meticulous about record keeping, and I found the original land grant from 1868, signed by President Andrew Johnson himself. I found every subsequent deed transfer, every property tax record, every survey map. The documentation was ironclad. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the law firm of Whitmore, Banks and Associates. It informed me that I was in violation of Meadowbrook Estates HOA bylaws, and demanded immediate compliance plus payment of accumulated fines totaling $7,500. They also included an invoice for the special assessment. I called a lawyer. Her name was Linda Zimmerman, and she came highly recommended by Frank. She was in her 50s with steel gray hair and a reputation for not backing down from a fight. "Let me see what you've got," she said when I met her at her office in Billings. I spread out all my documentation. She spent an hour going through everything, making notes, occasionally nodding or humming thoughtfully. Finally, she looked up. "This is airtight. Your family's claim to this land is indisputable. The HOA has absolutely no legitimate authority over your property. So, why are they doing this? Because the development isn't doing as well as they hoped. They overextended, built too many amenities, and now they need to expand their assessment base to cover costs. They're engaging in what's called boundary overreach, trying to forcibly incorporate surrounding properties into their jurisdiction. That's legal. Absolutely not. But it works if nobody challenges them. Most people see lawyers and court costs and just pay up." She leaned back in her chair. "The question is, how far are you willing to take this? As far as it needs to go. This is my family's land," she smiled. "Good. Then let's respond appropriately." Linda drafted a cease and desist letter that was a thing of beauty. It laid out our legal position in excruciating detail, cited relevant case law, and demanded that the HOA immediately retract all claims to my property and issue a written apology. She sent copies to the HOA board, their legal team, and the county recorder's office. For 2 weeks, everything was quiet. I thought maybe they'd back down. Then Patricia showed up again, this time with 2 other people. A man in his 60s wearing khakis and a polo shirt, and a younger woman with a pinched expression. "Mr. Owens, this is Ronald Garrett, our vice president, and Susan Walsh, our treasurer. We're here to discuss a compromise." I crossed my arms. "What kind of compromise?" Ronald stepped forward with what he probably thought was a friendly smile. "We understand there's been some confusion about property boundaries. We're willing to waive the fines and reduce your special assessment to $10,000 as a gesture of good faith." "No." Susan frowned. "Mr. Owens, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to work with you. My property isn't part of your HOA. I'm not paying you anything. And if you don't stop harassing me, my lawyer will file for a restraining order and sue you for harassment." Patricia's face flushed red. "You can't threaten us. We have every right to enforce our bylaws." "Not on my land, you don't. Now leave before I call the sheriff." They left, but Patricia turned back before getting in her car. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll regret this." That night, someone cut the lock on my south pasture gate and left it open. 30 head of cattle wandered out onto the county road. I spent 4 hours rounding them up, and it was pure luck no one hit one with their car. I couldn't prove it was the HOA, but the timing was suspicious. 2 days later, I found surveyor stakes driven into my property with little flags marked Meadowbrook Estates. I pulled them all up and threw them in a pile at the end of my driveway. Then things escalated. The county building inspector showed up claiming he'd received an anonymous complaint about unpermitted structures on my property. He wanted to inspect my barn, my equipment shed, and my house. I showed him permits for everything, some of them dating back decades. He left looking disappointed. Next came the health department, claiming concerns about groundwater contamination from livestock waste. I had environmental reports from the previous year showing everything was within acceptable limits. They took samples anyway and left empty-handed a week later. "They're trying to bury you in bureaucracy," Linda said when I called her. "This is harassment, plain and simple. We need to go on offense." "What do you suggest?" "We file a lawsuit. sue them for harassment, trespassing, and attempted theft of property. We demand an injunction preventing them from any further contact with you, and we make it public. Public. This kind of HOA overreach makes great news. Local papers will eat it up. Nothing stops bad behavior faster than sunlight. She was right. Once we filed the lawsuit, and she sent a press release to local media, my phone started ringing. A reporter from the Billings Gazette drove out to interview me. I showed her the original land grant, explained my family's history, and detailed the HOA's harassment. Her article ran 3 days later with the headline "Historic Montana Ranch Battles, HOA Overreach." The story got picked up regionally, then nationally. Suddenly, I was getting calls from news outlets in Denver, Seattle, even New York. There's something about the image of an HOA trying to bully a multi-generational ranch family that resonates with people. Patricia called me, furious. "You had no right to go to the media. You're making us look like villains. You are villains. You're trying to steal my property." We're doing nothing of the sort. We're simply trying to maintain property standards in our community. My property isn't in your community. Stop pretending it is. She hung up on me, but the media attention had an effect. The HOA's harassment stopped. No more mysterious gate openings, no more government inspectors, no more threatening letters. I thought maybe we'd won. Then I got served with papers. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was countersuing me for defamation, claiming my media statements had damaged their reputation and caused financial harm. They were seeking $250,000 in damages. Linda laughed when she read the filing. "This is ridiculous. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Everything you said was factual and can be proven. They're just trying to intimidate you with a slap suit." A what? Strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to silence critics by burying them in legal costs. But Montana has strong anti-slap laws. We can get this dismissed and probably recover our legal fees. She filed a motion to dismiss under Montana's anti-slap statute. We had a hearing scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, more news came out. An investigative reporter from a Billings TV station started digging into Meadowbrook Estates' finances and found irregularities. The HOA had been collecting assessments, but hadn't been transparent about how the money was spent. There were questions about no-bid contracts awarded to companies owned by board members' relatives. The story sparked interest from the Montana Attorney General's office. They opened an investigation into the HOA's financial practices. Suddenly, Patricia and her board had bigger problems than me, but they weren't done. One morning I woke to find a construction crew on my eastern boundary putting up a fence. I ran out there, shouting at them to stop. The foreman looked at his paperwork, confused. "We were hired by the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. They said this was the community boundary." "It's not. This is private property. You're trespassing." "Look, buddy, we're just doing the job we were hired for. We don't want trouble." "Then leave. Now. Before I call the sheriff." They packed up and left. I called Linda, who immediately got an emergency injunction hearing. The judge was not pleased when he heard that the HOA had sent contractors onto my property without permission. "This is beyond aggressive," Judge Harrison said, looking over his glasses at the HOA's lawyer. "Your clients seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding of property rights." The HOA lawyer, a slick guy named Marcus Chen, tried to argue that there was a legitimate boundary dispute. Judge Harrison shut him down. "There is no dispute. Mr. Owens has documentation going back 150 years establishing clear ownership. Your client's development is less than 3 years old. The math isn't complicated." He granted our injunction, prohibiting the HOA from any contact with me or my property pending resolution of the lawsuit. 2 days after the hearing, I found Patricia parked at the end of my driveway, just sitting in her Mercedes. I walked down to her car. "You're violating a court order by being here." She rolled down her window. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Our development is falling apart. People are demanding to see financial records. The Attorney General is investigating us. Property values are tanking. That's not my fault. You brought this on yourselves. We were just trying to maintain standards, to keep property values up. By lying about your boundaries and harassing people, by trying to force people who don't live in your development to pay your bills. It wasn't supposed to go this way." Her voice cracked. "We just needed a little more revenue. The development is underwater. We're going to lose everything. Then you should have been honest from the start, should have budgeted better, should have done a lot of things differently. But trying to steal my property wasn't the answer." She drove away slowly. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The anti-SLAPP hearing went exactly as Linda predicted. The judge dismissed the HOA's defamation suit within 15 minutes and ordered them to pay our legal fees, which totaled $42,000. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue for a stay, but the judge denied it. "Your clients filed a frivolous lawsuit designed to silence legitimate criticism," Judge Harrison said. "They're fortunate I'm not imposing additional sanctions." Meanwhile, the Attorney General's investigation was bearing fruit. It turned out Patricia and Ronald had been embezzling HOA funds for over a year. They'd created shell companies, submitted fake invoices, and paid themselves through fraudulent contracts. Susan, the treasurer, had been falsifying financial reports to cover it up. The total amount stolen was over $300,000. Criminal charges were filed. Patricia, Ronald, and Susan were arrested. The news coverage was extensive. The story had everything: corruption, greed, a plucky rancher defending his family's legacy. I did another round of interviews, and this time the focus was on HOA reform and the need for oversight of community associations. The remaining HOA board members, once they realized the extent of the fraud, voted to dissolve Meadowbrook Estates as a mandatory association and convert it to a voluntary community organization. Homeowners would no longer be required to pay assessments, and the association would have no enforcement powers. It was basically dead. Several homeowners in the development reached out to apologize. They'd had no idea what Patricia and her cronies were doing. Some of them had been skeptical of the expansion plans, but were told it was necessary. They felt betrayed and angry. My lawsuit against the HOA proceeded. With the criminal charges pending and the association dissolving, the HOA's insurance company quickly moved to settle. They offered $100,000 to make the whole thing go away. Linda advised me to take it. "You'll spend half that in legal fees if we go to trial, and there's no guarantee you'll get more. Plus, the association is broke. You can't squeeze blood from a stone." I agreed to the settlement. The money would help cover the costs of dealing with this mess and fund some improvements to the ranch I'd been putting off. Patricia's trial was scheduled for 8 months after her arrest. In the meantime, she, Ronald, and Susan all tried to cut deals with prosecutors. Susan got the best deal, agreeing to testify against the other two in exchange for probation and community service. Ronald got 3 years in prison. Patricia, as the ringleader, got 5 years and was ordered to pay restitution. At her sentencing hearing, I was there. I wanted to look her in the eye as the judge handed down her punishment. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Gone was the aggressive woman in the pantsuit with the clipboard. In her place was someone who'd gambled everything on a scheme that fell apart. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Patricia stood and turned to face the courtroom. Her eyes found mine. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I convinced myself we were doing the right thing, that we were protecting property values and building something good. But I was lying to myself. I got greedy, I got power hungry, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it." She looked at me directly. "Mr. Owens, I'm especially sorry for what I put you through. Your family's ranch is a piece of Montana history, and I tried to take it from you because it was convenient for me. That was wrong. I hope someday you can forgive me." I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Maybe I never would be. But I could see she was genuinely remorseful, and that counted for something. The judge sentenced her, and she was led away in handcuffs. I left the courthouse feeling oddly empty. I'd won. The ranch was safe. The bad guys were going to prison. But the whole thing had taken 2 years of my life, cost me money and sleep and peace of mind. Linda met me on the courthouse steps. "How are you feeling?" "Tired." "That's understandable. You've been through hell." "I just want to get back to ranching. To living my life without looking over my shoulder." She squeezed my arm. "You can now. It's over." She was right. Over the next few months, life returned to normal. The media attention faded. The Meadowbrook Estates development limped along, with many homeowners selling and moving away. Property values did tank, but that wasn't my problem. The voluntary community organization they'd formed focused on basic things like maintaining the entry sign and organizing social events. No enforcement powers, no mandatory fees, no harassment. I got a new neighbor. The property directly south of mine, which had been owned by a developer, was sold to a young family looking to start a small organic farm. Their name was Martinez, and they had 3 kids who were fascinated by the ranch. I hired the oldest, a teenage boy named Carlos, to help out during the summer. He was eager to learn and reminded me of myself at that age. Frank Morrison stopped by one afternoon with a case of beer. We sat on my porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "Hell of a thing you did," he said, taking a sip. "Standing up to them like that. I didn't have a choice. They were trying to take my land. A lot of people would have just paid them off, would have been easier." "Easier isn't always right," he nodded. "Your grandfather would be proud. He was stubborn as a mule too." I laughed. Grandpa Joe had been many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. He'd fought his own battles over the years, protecting the ranch from developers, dealing with government bureaucracy, weathering economic downturns. The ranch had survived because generations of Owens men had been willing to fight for it. Now it was my turn to be part of that legacy. The state legislature, prompted by the media coverage of my case, passed new laws regulating HOAs. They established clearer rules about boundary expansion, required independent audits of HOA finances, and created an ombudsman office to handle homeowner complaints. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I testified at one of the committee hearings, telling my story to a room full of legislators. Several other people testified too, sharing their own HOA horror stories. It was clear this wasn't just my problem. It was systemic. A producer from a documentary company contacted me about doing a film on HOA abuse. I declined. I'd had enough media attention to last a lifetime. I just wanted to be left alone to run my ranch in peace. Spring came, and with it the annual ritual of calving season. I spent long nights checking on pregnant cows, helping with difficult births, making sure newborn calves nursed properly. It was exhausting, messy work, but I loved it. This was what the ranch was about. Not legal battles or news cameras, just the land, the animals, and the work. Carlos turned out to be a natural with cattle. He had a calm demeanor that kept them relaxed, and he wasn't afraid of hard work. I taught him how to rope, how to doctor sick calves, how to fix fence. His parents were grateful for the job and the mentorship. He talks about the ranch constantly. Mrs. Martinez told me one day when she came to pick him up, "You're having a real impact on him. He's a good kid, natural rancher if he wants to be." His father and we left California to get away from all the regulations and HOAs and people telling us how to live. We wanted space, freedom. Then we heard about what happened to you and we almost didn't move here. What changed your mind? The fact that you won. That showed us there are still places where individuals can stand up for their rights and win. That mattered to us. After she left, I thought about what she'd said. The fight with the HOA hadn't just been about me and my ranch. It had been about the principle of property rights, about standing up to bullies, about not letting people with clipboards and bad intentions push you around. Summer passed in a blur of haying, fence repair, and cattle management. I hired Carlos full-time and brought on another hand, an older guy named Pete who'd worked ranches his whole life. We settled into a good rhythm. I started dating someone. Her name was Laura Zeller, and she was a veterinarian in town. We'd met when she came out to test my herd for disease. She was smart, funny, and completely unimpressed by my minor celebrity status from the HOA case. "You're that guy who fought the HOA," she said when we first met. "Unfortunately, yes. Must have been annoying dealing with all that." "That's an understatement." "Well, your cattle look healthy. Someone's taking good care of them." We started talking after she finished her work, and I found myself telling her about the ranch, my grandfather, the history of the place. She listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. When she was about to leave, I worked up the nerve to ask if she wanted to get dinner sometime. She smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." Our first date was at a steakhouse in Billings. We talked for 3 hours, closing down the restaurant. She told me about growing up in Wyoming, about deciding to become a vet, about her own struggles with an HOA in her condo complex that tried to prevent her from parking her work truck in her assigned spot. They said it was commercial vehicle and therefore prohibited. Never mind that I lived there and needed it for my job. "What did you do?" Told them to pound sand and kept parking there. "They fined me." I ignored the fines. Eventually they gave up because the legal costs of pursuing it weren't worth it. I laughed. "You're stubborn. Takes one to know one." We started seeing each other regularly. She'd come out to the ranch on weekends, and I'd drive into town during the week to meet her for dinner. It was the first serious relationship I'd had since moving back to Montana, and it felt right. Fall came with its spectacular display of gold and orange. The aspen trees on the hillsides lit up like fire. We moved the cattle to winter pasture and started preparing for the cold months ahead. Montana winters are brutal, and ranchers who don't prepare pay for it. One evening, Laura and I were sitting by the fireplace in the ranch house when she asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd given in? If you'd just paid the HOA and avoided the fight?" I considered it. Sometimes, it would have been easier in a lot of ways. But it wouldn't have been right. You would have resented it every single day, and once you pay them, they own you. They know they can push you around. It never would have ended with one payment. "That's what happened with my dad," she said quietly. He had a small business, and the city kept hitting him with new regulations and fees. He paid them because he thought he had to, but they kept coming back for more. Eventually, he just gave up and closed the shop. I always wondered what would have happened if he'd fought back. Fighting back is expensive and stressful, but sometimes it's necessary. Winter arrived with a vengeance. We got hit with 3 major snowstorms in December alone. I spent hours each day breaking ice on water tanks, feeding hay, checking on cattle. Pete and Carlos worked alongside me, and we kept the operation running despite the brutal conditions. Laura came out on Christmas Eve. We cooked dinner together, exchanged simple gifts, and watched the snow fall outside. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced during the chaos of the legal battle. I could get used to this, she said, leaning against me on the couch. Me too. The ranch, I mean, the lifestyle. It's hard work, but there's something honest about it. That's the best description I've heard. Honest, she looked up at me. Are you planning to stay here, long term? This is my home. My family's home for 5 generations. I'm not going anywhere. Good, because neither am I. We got engaged in the spring, right as the snow was melting and the first green shoots were appearing. I proposed on horseback, up on the ridge overlooking the ranch. She said yes before I'd even finished asking. We planned a small wedding for the following fall. Just family and close friends, held right here on the ranch. Laura moved in that summer, bringing her 2 dogs and a cat. The animals adjusted to ranch life quickly, and the house felt more alive with her in it. The years that followed were good. We ran the ranch together, with Laura continuing her vet practice part-time and helping with cattle management. Carlos went to college but came back during summers and eventually joined us full-time after graduation. We expanded the herd, improved our grazing practices, and even started a small side business selling grass-fed beef directly to consumers. The HOA case became a distant memory, something that happened to a younger, different version of me. But its impact lingered. I got occasional calls from people fighting their own HOA battles, asking for advice. I always told them the same thing. Document everything, get a good lawyer, and don't back down if you're in the right. The Meadowbrook Estates development never recovered. Most of the original homeowners moved away and the properties were bought up by investors who rented them out. The grand vision of a planned community with strict rules and high property values had collapsed. The voluntary association limped along, but without enforcement powers or mandatory fees, it was basically meaningless. Patricia got out of prison after serving 3 years. I heard she'd moved to Idaho and was working as a bookkeeper. Ronald served his full sentence. Susan completed her probation and moved to Oregon. The whole thing had destroyed their lives, which seemed fitting given what they'd tried to do to mine. Judge Harrison, who'd presided over many of the hearings, retired and wrote a book about property rights and HOA abuse. He interviewed me for a chapter about my case. When the book came out, he sent me a signed copy with a note that read, "Thank you for standing up for what was right. You reminded me why I became a judge." Frank Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 78. At his funeral, his daughter told me that her father had spent his last years proud that he'd encouraged me to fight. "He said you had the heart of a real Montana rancher," she said. That was the highest compliment he knew. Laura and I had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. We named them Joseph and Clara after my grandparents. Watching them grow up on the ranch, learning to ride horses and help with chores, I felt the weight of 5 generations of Owens family history. This land had been fought for, worked, preserved, and protected. Now it was my responsibility to pass it on to them. One afternoon, when Joseph was 10 and Clara was 8, they asked me about the HOA story. They'd heard bits and pieces over the years but wanted to know the whole thing. We sat on the porch, the same spot where Patricia had first showed up all those years ago, and I told them the story. About how people tried to take our land, about fighting back, about standing up for what was right even when it was hard. "Were you scared?" Clara asked. "Sometimes. Mostly I was angry. This was our land, our family's legacy. Nobody had the right to take it." "What if you'd lost?" Joseph asked. "Then I would have lost fighting, but giving up without a fight was never an option." They seemed to understand. Later, I found them in the barn, looking at the original land grant from 1868 that I kept framed in my office. They were studying it carefully, tracing the signature with their fingers. "That's our history," Joseph said to his sister. "Yeah," Clara agreed. "We have to protect it." I stood in the doorway, watching them, and felt a profound sense of peace. The ranch would continue. The legacy would endure, not because of the land itself, but because each generation understood the responsibility of stewardship, of fighting for what mattered. The legal reforms that came out of my case helped hundreds of other homeowners fight back against abusive HOAs. The Ombudsman Office fielded thousands of complaints and helped resolve disputes without costly litigation. The audit requirements uncovered fraud in several other associations, leading to more criminal prosecutions. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was progress. I gave occasional talks at agricultural conferences about property rights and the importance of defending family farms and ranches. I wasn't a natural public speaker, but the message resonated with people who understood that their land was more than just an asset. It was a legacy, a way of life, a connection to the past and the future. Laura became the county veterinarian, balancing her practice with her work on the ranch. She was respected in the community for her skill and her willingness to go out in any weather to help an animal in need. Together we built a life that honored the past while looking toward the future. 20 years after the HOA battle, a journalist doing a follow-up story came out to interview me. She wanted to know how the case had changed my life. "It taught me that some things are worth fighting for," I told her. "That principle matters more than convenience, and that ordinary people can stand up to institutions and win if they're willing to see it through. Do you have any regrets?" I thought about it. I regret that it was necessary. I regret the time and money and stress it cost. But I don't regret fighting. If I'd given in, I would have regretted that every day for the rest of my life. What would you tell someone facing a similar situation? Get good legal advice. Document everything. Don't let them intimidate you. And remember that property rights are fundamental. They can't just take what's yours because it's convenient for them. The story ran on the anniversary of the original case. It sparked a new round of discussions about HOA reform and property rights. Several states passed additional legislation strengthening homeowner protections. The movement that started with my fight continued to grow and evolve. I thought about Patricia sometimes. Wondered if she'd rebuilt her life, if she'd learned from her mistakes. I never tried to find out. Some chapters are better left closed. The ranch prospered. We weathered droughts, harsh winters, economic downturns, and all the other challenges that come with agricultural life. But we survived because we were adaptable, because we worked hard, and because we never forgot what we were fighting for. Carlos eventually bought Pete's share of the operation when Pete retired, becoming a full partner. He married a teacher from town, and they built a house on the southern section of the property. It felt right to have another family on the land, to know that the ranch would continue beyond my lifetime. On quiet evenings, I'd sometimes walk up to the ridge and look out over the 2,000 acres that had been in my family for over a century and a half. I'd think about my great-great-great-grandfather staking his claim here, about all the generations who'd worked this land, about the fight to keep it when people tried to take it. Laura would often join me on those walks. We'd stand together watching the sun set over the mountains, the cattle grazing peacefully below, the ranch house lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. "Still worth it?" she'd ask, knowing the answer. Every single day, the land endured, the family endured. And the lesson remained clear. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Property rights aren't just legal concepts. They're the foundation of freedom, the ability to build something lasting and pass it on to future generations. The HOA had tried to take that from me. They'd failed because I refused to give up, because I had good people supporting me, and because the law ultimately protected what was right. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, but justice eventually prevailed. That's the story I told my grandchildren years later when they asked about the famous HOA battle. I told them about standing up for what's right, about the importance of knowing your rights, about the value of persistence in the face of adversity. They listened with wide eyes, asking questions, trying to understand how anyone could have tried to take our ranch. I explained as best I could about greed, about bureaucracy, about people who think rules give them power over others. But I also told them about the good things that came from it, about the reforms that helped other families, about the community support we received, about the satisfaction of fighting for principle and winning. Remember, I told them, this ranch has been in our family for over 170 years. It survived because every generation was willing to fight for it. Someday it'll be your turn to protect it. Whatever challenges come, remember your history. Remember what this land means. And never, ever let anyone take it from you without a fight. They nodded solemnly, understanding in their own way the weight of that responsibility. And I knew, watching them, that the ranch would survive whatever challenges the future held. Because the Owens family had learned through hard experience that some fights are worth having. The sun set over the Montana hills, casting long shadows across the land my ancestor had claimed so long ago. The ranch was quiet except for the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. It was home, it was legacy, and it was worth every minute of the fight to keep it.